This is Jeff Martin with Magic City Books. I'm so thrilled to have you here. This is our final event of 2020. Thank God this year is coming to an end. What a crazy year. But we have done about, give or take, I think around 100 virtual events since this pandemic started. And it's been great to stay connected with all of you. And we've talked to, gosh, I mean, everybody from Colson Whitehead to Ta-Nehisi Coates to
Oh,
Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson and everybody under the sun. It's been great. And it's been so great connecting with you guys, staying connected. We hope to see you soon. But what a wonderful, wonderful way to end our year by having a hugely special honor to talk with Mr. John Densmore for his wonderful book, The Seekers. John, welcome to Tulsa virtually. It's such a pleasure to have you
hey, Jeff.
here.
Happy to close out this lousy year and look toward the light coming.
Yes, well, your book is kind of a perfect, and in some ways, a closure for us to use as a tool to move on to a more hopeful, interesting year, hopefully looking into 2021. But I want to tell everybody, you guys all have books. Thank you for buying tickets. If you have questions, please drop those into the Q&A and I'll ask some of those as we go along. And but we're just going to go ahead and get started. So, John, I know that you've done a bunch of these events. I'm curious, though, you talk to so many people in the book, and the book kind of talks about these, interesting intersections in your life and all the people that you've had a, amazing chance to spend time with and share space with. Is there anybody or one or two people that everyone asks about, like, that everybody wants to know what they were like?
That's funny. Everyone, this is a riot. Everyone seems to ask about my mom.
Well, that's all.
And I never thought I'd have my mom and Lou Reed in the same book, but here we are.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, um, she encouraged me playing piano when I was 8 years old and tolerated drums in the cacophonous drums in the living room. And then actually a few months ago, it dawned on me that I had written in the Elvin Jones chapter, that Coltrane's drummer, that all us drummers, or everyone, the first drum beat we ever heard was in the womb. It was our mom, you know? So of course my mom is in the book. She's first. I came out of her.
Yeah, that's your kind of conception percussion system. Yeah.
Right.
Um, well, that's, you talk about the Coltrane and the drummer there. That's a pretty big part of your life, and it seems like you got to know him quite well. I mean, it would be silly for us not to talk about the influence of jazz on you and the Doors. But I'm just curious, growing up when you did. It seems like you could have very easily gone in that direction and kind of just a straight jazz trajectory. What
Yeah.
kind of kept you off that path? I mean, you've gone down that road other different times, but
I loved music. I never thought I could make a living at it, but I was playing casuals, like in my teens, I played dance cotillions, bar mitzvahs, bars. I had a fake ID. Uh, and I always loved jazz. And then I stumbled into this band, and the keyboard player, Ray, loved jazz too. And I said, "Hey, man, do you know All Blues by Miles?" And he said, "Yeah." And that's the first song we played. And so uh, I was kind of home. I mean, we played blues and jazz, and then we got into our own originals. But that stuff filtered in. Ray's Chicago blues filtered in there, and so that's why I ended up in this band I'm still talking about 50 years later.
Well, it's funny, this is the 50th anniversary, I believe, of Morrison Hotel, and next year is the 50th anniversary of LA Woman.
Yeah.
And obviously that was your final album with Jim Morrison. I've always been fascinated, just since you brought it up, the kind of trajectory the band was on, how you were kind of really going much more into that blues direction those last couple albums. Like it was really kind of leaning even more away from, if you look at the first Doors album and where you were on LA Woman, there was kind of a pathway you were heading down.
Yeah.
Do you think that would have continued even more into that space.
Probably,
Yeah.
probably. The first album, we were kind of nervous, never recorded. Light My Fire was on the first, and so it's been downhill ever since. But uh, second album, we got comfortable, and Strange Days was like the studio was the fifth door. We got we got experimental and fun, and then we went crazy in the middle period and tried to make Sergeant Pepper and put strings and horns on Soft Parade. And then it was like, wait a minute, we're going way over the top here. And the last two, Morrison Hotel and LA Woman, headed back to our roots, which was playing the blues in a garage.
You mentioned the Soft Parade. That was the album to me that always was the least accessible when I was younger, because I was funny. I came to the Doors at an interesting point. I'm 40 years old, and I was a young kid when the Doors film came out. No matter what you think of it, but it put the Doors into the culture in a way at that moment in like the early 1990s that, a lot of bands that were, 20, 30 years old at that point didn't have that opportunity. But I came to it at that point. And I remember kind of going through the discography and getting to that one and always being like, what is this thing? But what's interesting is it's grown on me more as I've aged, and kind of the tapestry of that album. You mentioned it was Sergeant Pepper, but it really is different in some ways than the
Well,
other one.
we wanted to experiment with a whole orchestra. The critics panned us for changing our precious sound. Touch Me was number one, so ha ha. But maybe we wouldn't have gotten back to Morrison Hotel and LA Woman. LA Woman is one of my faves, if we hadn't gone through that sort of giant experimentation.
Yeah, I mean, that's the craziest thing I think about, and kind of talking about the Seekers and all these things. One of the things that I think people still are so fascinated with about music from that era is how quickly bands would change. Now, obviously, the Beatles is a great example of how bands people realized the band was around for 10 years or less, and they changed so many different times. But a lot of bands did that. The Rolling Stones did that, all these bands. And the fans kept up with them, right? You don't see that now as much. I don't see bands kind of going through these huge, almost this chrysalis kind of situation where they start as one thing, end up as something else, but their fan base stays with them and in some ways grows. But there was an acceptance and kind of a willingness to go with that.
I don't want to sound like a dinosaur,
Yeah.
but possibly technology impeded that. CDs were invented, so then you could hit a button if you were bored in 2 seconds to go to the next cut and the next cut and the next cut. And then streaming, primarily folks go for singles. And so, LPs, you're forced to, we programmed the whole album for an entire half-hour listening experience, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Things are different now, but it's portable. You can have a zillion songs on your phone.
Well, before the pandemic, of course, things have changed since then, but there was this interesting idea that, in the early 1950s rock and roll era, everything was about live and singles, right? The concept of the album didn't quite exist. And in some ways, the music industry circled back on itself in the streaming era to where bands now have to go out and play live. And it's really about the individual song. So it's kind of an interesting 360 to that whole situation.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk about, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I got a tip of the hat to one of those 50s rockers, Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yes.
Which, we wanted to, I was aware of Elvis and Chuck Berry and all the roots of rock and roll, but I was a bit of a jazz snob. And then I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and I thought, wow, are these guys gay? What's going on here? And that intrigued me. And then when we got going, we were playing the Hollywood Bowl, and we said, listen, we want to have some 50s rocker. How about Johnny Cash? And this was before his TV show. And I Walk the Line was a hit, but that's it. And they said, no, he was a felon. We're not hiring a felon. Okay. So 6 months later, we're at the Forum, and we had enough power. That's another big LA venue. And we just said, we're hiring Jerry Lee Lewis. And the promoter said, uh, no one's going to know who he is. And we said, we don't care. And, you know, he played, and some folks were going, Jim, Jim, in the middle of his set. And he got up on the piano at the end and said, for those who love me, God love you. For the rest of you, have a heart attack. Terrific. Don't mess with the killer.
No, for sure. And, I remember reading the book Hellfire about Jerry Lee Lewis, written by Nick Tosches years and years ago. It was the book they kind of used as the inspiration for the film that Dennis Quaid ended up being. But the book is just amazing, and he's someone who I remember, loving his music, and I still do. But what about, someone like him who, many of the people in the book are no longer with us, people that are not around. You mentioned Lou Reed.
Yeah, about half of them.
Jerry Lee Lewis is.
Yeah.
Do you still maintain relationships with some of these folks all these years later?
Well, I have a relatively new relationship with Willie Nelson, who the last few years, who's 87 or something. And Paul Simon is pushing 80, and these guys are like mentors for me, they're really still creative and vibrant, and maybe that's the key to their longevity. Yeah. So, and then, cautionary tale, Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin joined the 27 Club and checked out with Kurt Cobain and Amy Winehouse and all the others. It's interesting. The so-called primitive African cultures thousands of years ago had this thing they called Latima, which was a period between the age of 14 to 27 where the elders watch over the youth. And the youth are supposed to be volatile in there, but the elders kind of keep an eye so they don't get too crazy. So they knew 27 was pivotal a long time ago.
Yeah, it's kind of, when you look at that and over the last, 50 plus years in music history, it's kind of strange, the way that's kind of all happened.
Well, maybe it's that in your early 20s, you feel immortal. And in your late 20s, oh my God, I have to get a job. Maybe I'll have a kid and get married. Oh God, yeah.
You just had a birthday recently, so happy belated birthday.
Thanks.
And you grew up in LA. I think you're still in LA. Have you ever, for any long period of time, lived anywhere besides LA?
Well, lived in London for a few months and been in New York for a few months at a time, but I wasn't really moving there. I was just working on music,
Yeah. Do you, and that city has changed a lot, from when you were a kid, of course. Do you feel like LA is as vibrant and creative as it's always been, or does it go in waves? Do you see those kind of ups and downs since you've been there so long?
It's much more vibrant and diverse. It was, it's spread out, so you have to drive to get to different cultures. But it was kind of lame in the 50s, and there was smog quite a bit. It's better now. And it's more diverse, and diversity equals strength. And, all the people in this new book, The Seekers, is pretty diverse. I got a classical musical conductor. I got a country guy. I got
Gustavo Dudamel is who you're mentioning there. Yeah.
Yeah. These mystical guys, Ram Dass and Dalai Lama. I draw from, it's what inspired me. And so, growing up, and I think there's, if you have a diverse palette, you're open to learning from all of that stuff. Like I said, all my dogs I got from the pound, and they're really strong. They live long.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, have you always, when you say the Seekers, obviously you're talking about yourself also, right? You're talking about these people.
Right. That's why it's plural. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that something that you've always been? Is that just something that's in you, that that kind of need to know more and kind of know more about the world? Were your parents like that?
No, not so much, but that's in me. But then I think, wait a minute, a little kernel of that is in everybody, isn't it? That's why I say, okay, you're going to read about these icons, but you too can play your piano in a closet that no one hears, or paint a painting no one sees, but you're kind of stepping into the same creative zone as all these icons. And you know, it's so crazy out now. Any kind of medicine for the soul, which music is good to practice. So, you know, find a half hour a day or more or whatever, if you can, you know.
Yeah. So, as someone who does seek things out, and, you have a very active life, what's it been like being holed up this year? Has that been tough for you, kind of in your mental health, and kind of, having to kind of be there, or are you just like, I'm cool with it. I'm going to sit around, play drums, read books, do what I want
Well, you know, I've been a writer the last several years, so I'm used to the cave existence, but I do miss community. I mean, I was playing drums, hand drums, and doing poetry at clubs here and there, and I got fed by that as much as Madison Square Garden. If it was, if I was really communicating and I could feel the audience, live music is just, it's, uh, it's, it's like being around a sonic campfire, getting healed by the crackling sounds or something, you know. So we all miss that, don't we? But
to.
eh, maybe the end of next year,
Yeah.
hope. And my paperback will be out, and then I'll get to see you in person,
You
maybe.
could do some real book signings. Yeah. You mentioned, obviously, you've written other books. Your book Riders on the Storm is, kind of, to me, like the Doors book, but I'm curious about that in the sense of, the more I think about it, I wonder, do you kind of view that as like the Gospels, basically, like if the other two guys had written their books, would they be, and they were, because obviously you're covering the same general history, but would they have been completely different in the way they recounted some of the events that you write about?
Well, Ray wrote a book. I think he called
Yeah.
it Light My Fire, which was
Yeah.
a bit abrasive towards me, actually, to be blunt. R.I.P. Ray. But we had struggles with the ownership of the name,
Yeah.
and that's what my second book was about. I have, Jeff, I've got 3 self-centered memoirs.
Yeah. The door. Yeah. Doors unhinged. Yeah, for
So,
sure. Yeah.
and Robbie, I think, is writing one now. I
Oh, wow.
think he's having help.
Yeah.
I tried that 10, 15, 20 years ago. I got a ghostwriter and sat down with him, and then I read the stuff and went, well, that's not me. I got to learn how to do this. And then Riders was a bestseller.
Mm.
The Oliver Stone movie, which I liked, helped sell it. I put it out at the same time. But I couldn't, I don't know. I knew I was a musician. I felt insecure saying I was a writer until a few years after the first book. And I wrote many articles for little periodicals. And one was in The Nation about selling songs for commercials, and it went viral. And I thought, okay, I got another avenue of creativity here. I have my voice. So
I mean,
pros
yeah,
voice.
you have been very vocal about the non-commercialization of that music, which I know has caused some rifts in the band over the years. But it seems like, at a moment where everything now is commercialized, to me, it seems like you were a little bit ahead of the curve on that one because, you know, I don't know.
Well,
I guess there's two ways of looking at it, but
there's Jeff. If you're a new band trying to pay the rent, it's a different time. I get it. Maybe if you get successful, re-examine that decision and don't break on through to a new deodorant. So,
well, you mentioned, we were talking before about, Dylan, and, the Dylan Museum is coming here to Tulsa next year. And it's a big
yeah,
thing. Of course, there's been a lot in the news about him selling his whole catalog
correct.
last week. And he's also been, Dylan has sold his stuff to Victoria's Secret commercials and all kinds of stuff. And, of course, he's kind of seen as the, kind of the pinnacle of what he does. But in some ways, he transcends that. It's like, well, his stuff's people can, I've heard the argument like, well, his stuff is kind of, you can't commercialize it. It's like, so, it's so perfect that he could sell it to anywhere and it wouldn't taint the music at all, right? That's some of the argument you see on that,
Yeah, yeah.
you know,
Well, yeah, it hurts me a little when I hear the times they are a changing, which was about, politics, get out of the way if you're not going to be, progressive or whatever the hell it was. And now it's selling insurance. The times are changing. You're getting old. You're going to die. So buy this stuff.
yeah,
Hey, Pete Townsend, I wrote all about this in The Doors Unhinged.
yeah,
Pete Townsend said, I don't give a F if you fell in love with Shirley to my song. It's my song. But Jim went nuts with the idea of Come On Buick, Light My Fire, a song he didn't write. Robbie primarily wrote that. There was one line from Jim, our love become a funeral pyre, Morrison-esque line there. And I thought, well, God, he really cared about the whole catalog. And he's my ancestor now. And so I'm kind of rigid. I'm on letting that change.
yeah. Well, on that same tip though, there's a difference between, of course, a commercial for deodorant and an artistic film. There have been some really iconic movie moments with Doors. None more than The End and Apocalypse Now, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah,
But even like a film like Forrest Gump uses like 5 Doors songs.
true. Hey,
Is that
you've done your
something?
research.
Yeah. Is that something that you're involved with when those things happen too?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We it's selling product. I mean, we have merchandising, John,
Yeah.
but it's just selling some other product that kind of distorts. Well, okay, this article I wrote in The Nation, Tom Waits wrote a letter to the editor saying, stick to your guns, John. When you change your lyrics to a jingle, it's the sound of coins in your pocket and you just sold your audience. That was Tom.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
many sides to this coin. And I let the editor of Vanity Fair criticize Dylan about the Victoria's Secret thing in my last book, Unhinged. I let her do it. And
Yeah.
then I, said, and I felt that way. I hear some of his songs and they're so important to me. It does transcend. This new occurrence, as I think Rolling Stone said, well, it'll be interesting. I guess we're going to see a lot of Dylan songs selling perfume.
Yeah.
We shall see.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
I wrote that he doesn't he doesn't like being, he became the poet prophet of the 60s. And he went, wait a minute, I don't have the answers here. Don't put me on this pedestal. Okay, I think I'll do something really crazy to think you change it. You don't know me. So.
Yeah, no, it definitely seems performative in a certain sense. So I'm curious, one of my favorite people you write about is Lou Reed, and it seems like you knew him pretty well. But the Velvets and the Doors were coming around like almost the exact same time.
Yeah.
And you couldn't think of 2 different sounding bands and 2 different kinds of bands, but in some ways, what I think about them is I can't hear either one for 2 seconds without knowing that sound. Like they have a sound that's just like you get it. Did you feel that way about them at the time, or did you kind of come to think about his solo career and his music and become more interested in what he was doing after the Velvets?
Yeah. I first heard them at the Whiskey, and not that I was into the Beach Boys, although I do admire the Beach Boys, but they were so gritty. The new East Coast, New York. I was just like, wow, this is rough. I don't get it. And then after a little time, I started realizing, oh, wait a minute. He's playing the guitar like it was a snare drum or something, and the lyrics are very real about what's going on, in the underbelly. And I started to really dig it. And then his solo career, I'm crazy for.
Yeah.
So.
There's so few people that I think viewed themselves as a poet first, and Lou Reed always thought of himself as a poet
Yeah.
first.
Mm,
Obviously, Jim Morrison, I think you would
yeah.
agree with, thought of himself as a poet first. Um, did those guys, I don't know, was there any kind of competition amongst bands like that back then to like do the most, I don't know, poetic thing, or kind of say the most profound thing, or.
I don't know. I mean, I know Jim admired Dylan.
Yeah.
I mean, we were, he came from the folk genre, so our music was different. Our music was like this melting pot of jazz and Chicago blues, and then Robbie's flamenco, and it was just a weird American gumbo that everybody thinks is tasty. So
Well, it's hard to compare anybody to the Doors. When I think about it, I mean, it's just very difficult because it was such a unique mix. Zappa, there's some Zappa, you can
yeah,
see that.
yeah,
Um, but anyway, I want to ask a couple of audience questions while we have them here.
cool.
David says, do you ever show up for the drumming circle on Venice Beach?
I've been there on the outskirts, and
Right.
I also have done some drum circles myself,
Yeah.
led them in private homes for 10 or 15 or 20 people. And, it's that same thing, like it's community. And that's what we're all missing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were talking earlier before we came on. I was curious if the Doors ever played Tulsa. We found that they did play a state fair show here in '67. Maybe somebody watching went to that, but obviously you've played a ton of gigs, so you're not going to remember all those. But we do have a guest that says last Saturday was the 50th anniversary of the final Doors show. Um, do you remember that night?
New Orleans? Yeah, I do. Because the night before was in Texas, and we played Riders on the Storm live, and we were just beginning to do that, and we thought, hey, wow, maybe we kind of will be kind of a cool jazz rock kind of live thing. And then Jim was so drunk in New Orleans, and I had been pleading with Ray and Robbie to get off the road for about a year. I mean, we didn't have substance abuse clinics. I didn't know he had a disease, but I knew there was an elephant in the room and nobody was talking about it. And I didn't give a shit if, oh, can I say that?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want.
That if we didn't get another album out of him, let's help the guy survive. Anyway, so yeah, New Orleans was sad.
You guys played a ton of shows, especially early on. Is there an era or like a window of time before, addiction or alcoholism took super strong hold that you think was like your best period live, like when things were just at their peak for the band?
Yeah, the first half all the way up to absolutely live.
Yeah.
It's interesting how even with the addiction in the studio, damn, Jim delivered. Because I think he knew, well, this is going to be for posterity. If it's lousy, it ain't, or it might last, so I better make this good. Plus, if he was too loaded, we'd say, go home. And we get the great vocal the next day.
Yeah. You mentioned LA Woman. You said you have a particular fondness for that. That's my personal favorite Doors album. And it has an energy that's just different. And, even a song like that, you think about someone like him who was, struggling at the time with different things and, overweight and kind of in some ways seemed lethargic in interviews and stuff at that time. But that has such energy to it. That album has such
Yeah.
power, raw intensity. Was that what you're saying, like capturing that in that moment?
Yeah, we were empowered by producing it ourselves with Bruce Botnick, our longtime engineer. That was empowering. Paul Rothschild was wonderful, taught us how to make records, and then he got too dictatorial and perfectionistic, sort of the middle period. I think 100 takes on Unknown Soldier or what? Come on. And so, um, L.A. Woman. Oh man, just the concept of writing about the city as a woman. Never saw the top cops and cars, topless bars. Never saw a woman so alone. Oh, that's
That's the
And
stuff.
then on the slow section, Mr. Mojo Rising, I didn't know that. None of us knew this. We recorded it. And I knew mojo was a blues term for sexual prowess or whatever the hell. So I was the one who said, listen, let's slow this tempo down and then let's speed it back up like an orgasm. But we got to land at the same tempo we started at the beginning of the song 7 minutes earlier. Good luck. But anyway, we finish and Jim writes down his name, big letters, Jimorr. And then he moves them around and it spells Mr. Mojo Rising. Holy shit. This guy's gifted.
The anagram.
Yeah. Risin. Yeah.
That's so funny. That song has such power, and the energy of it. My favorite moment is in some ways a moment that's not even written. It's like when the tempo starts kicking back up, Jim Morrison just basically screams.
Yeah.
And it just almost feels like this like jet propulsion at the end, and it just kind of kicks it off.
Okay, so we get back to less takes with Morrison Hotel, and then we say goodbye to Paul, and then we're doing it ourselves. We're really free, and I say to Ray, we're talking about how let's do this. Let's just do a couple takes. Who cares if there's mistakes? And I said to Ray, Miles Davis on Miles at Carnegie Hall, there's an opening trumpet mistake on So What? Da 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 blah da. And the producer said, Miles, what are we going to do? We could take it out. And he said, nah, it's great. It feels great. And I told that story to Ray, and we just jammed. A couple takes on everything.
Yeah.
Screw it. Let's just go for it.
I love that. I love those moments like Dylan on Ballad of a Thin Man. He laughs halfway through the song. There's just things like that just seem so, it's just an honesty to it that I think is so real.
I have this arrogance to say that LA Woman maybe was the first punk album. It was very minimal. And then Elvis Costello did, whatever he did. And yeah.
Well, you mentioned, we were talking about John Doe of the band X, and their debut album, Los Angeles, which Ray Manzarek produced, feels, it's 10 years basically after LA Woman. It feels in some ways like a bookend, and it does, because everything in between there is punk leading up to them.
Yeah.
I think that's in some ways very true, that trajectory, of that to that. So when you were putting the book together, you've met tons of amazing people beyond the people that are in the book, of course. How did you kind of decide who's in the book and who's not in the book? And you probably have some good stories that you can't tell too, obviously.
Well, people say, oh, do you have more people to interview? I didn't interview anybody.
Right.
I realized, I heard of this mystical book, Meetings with Remarkable Men by Gurdjieff. And I thought, I can change it to musicians and give a tip of the hat to people who have inspired me. So I wrote a few chapters on important people, Elvin and I don't know who else. And then as I went along, I realized, they don't have to be famous. Wait a minute. There's several people, Emil Richards, Fred Katz was my professor. They're on the same level as all these people. They're just not real well known, but they fed me. And so I'm going to show that, and maybe it'll feed everybody else.
Yeah. I'll tell people, and if you're in the area where we are here in Tulsa, down the street from the bookstore is the Woody Guthrie Center, which is an amazing facility. And actually right now they have a photography show of Henry Diltz up right now. And Henry took the iconic Morrison Hotel cover shot and shot a bunch of stuff with you guys. But anyway, anybody who wants to know or see that, there's a lot of cool outtakes and other pieces there in that show. It's just a
synchronicity.
Yeah, very much so. We have another question from an audience member saying, this is from Elizabeth, who says, do you ever write fiction? And have you ever had any interest in going that route?
That's scary. Oh
Yeah.
my God. I mean, I had stories in my head, and now I've got a pretty good prose voice. I tried writing lyrics and it was terrible. It just, I don't know. Lyrics are like poetry, and it's sort of minimal. It's the skeleton of language. You've got to really pack in all that power into a few words. That intimidates me. I actually do have a, a terrible novel that I've rewritten, and then I turned it into a screenplay. And maybe someday, maybe it's about, well, someone who uh, uh, goes to Canada during the Vietnam War. There was three choices: you go to jail, you go to Vietnam, or you go to Canada. And uh, that was my era. And it's interesting how we've been kind of polarized the last few years. That for and against, and
I mean,
boy,
that
memories.
conversation came back up in the early 2000s after the Iraq War, and people talking about, making decisions like that. I remember there was discussions of a draft after 9/11 and
Yeah,
situations like that.
a draft wouldn't be bad. I mean, and that's I was saying that years ago when my son, who's now 28, uh, he would have been drafted, and but it levels the playing field. It cuts out the bullshit.
Yeah.
So
I just was listening last week to, we were talking about Oliver Stone's memoir, which just came out. And what's so funny is he can't help himself. I swear to God, every chapter of that book, he references Doors lyrics in every chapter, every chapter.
wait a minute, did he get permission for that?
Yeah,
No,
good question. Good question. But
yeah.
he talks about it, and you can tell it's just so ingrained in him. We have a couple of questions actually about that film. Um, what
Let
was,
me interject.
yeah,
Oliver was in Vietnam as a soldier, which it's hard to understand because he's a smart guy, but he's some sort of military rebel, so he had to go to war. Most of us more educated knew it was not the right one, but the Doors were, as Billy Joel wrote in some song. We will all go down together. We played our Doors tapes. We were the most
yeah.
popular band in Vietnam. So we fed him, uh, and helped him get through that. And so that's probably why we're so ingrained.
Yeah, I mean, Oliver Stone left Yale and enlisted to go to Vietnam, which is
Right.
just crazy.
Yep.
So we have another question that kind of references one of my favorite books, which is The White Album by Joan Didion. And Carolyn says, do you remember Joan Didion being around in the recording studio? Because she kind of shadowed you guys and wrote about you at that
Oh,
time.
that's great. Sure, I remember her. She was kind of over in the corner, very quiet, and and Jim. I think she wrote about this. Jim, he was messing with her. He just he lit a match and then he sort of moved it down towards his crotch and looked at her. Okay, but I'm glad you brought that up because um, there's a documentary on Joan, and they asked for a Doors song, which I was very happy to get to them, and I just a good friend of hers is a friend of mine who loves this new book, The Seekers, and I said, "Can Joan read?" And she said, "Well, she has people read to her." And I said, I just did an audio book of The Seekers, and I read the whole thing myself and played music under it. I played Jerry Lee Lewis piano under that chapter and Doors drumming under some of that. And so you just reminded me, and I'm going to get that to Joan Didion.
Hey, that's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
So what kind of stuff do you read? Do you read? We talked about fiction. Do you read much fiction? What kind of stuff keeps you busy right now?
Yeah, I was reading, what is it, The Water Dancer? You had him on.
Yeah, I just had an event with him a couple weeks ago. Yeah,
Yeah,
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
powerful.
He's amazing. Yeah.
Wow. what a mind. Whew, fertile.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's almost, I told him at the time, I said, it's almost not fair that he's a brilliant journalist and that good of a fiction writer, and having that much talent.
Yeah. I mean, you think about Patti Smith and wait a minute. She jumpstarts the entire punk movement and writes a National Book Award. Oh my God.
Yeah. And you write about her in this book. When do you remember when you first got to meet and know her?
Um, when was that? Oh yeah, I saw her doing a benefit for some Smithsonian archives, and she was playing with her son, and she mixed up the set list and dropped their sheet music, and it was so charming I couldn't believe it. It's like she couldn't do any wrong. There was a presence there that was just knockout. And I went back and introduced myself, and I told her that "Gone Again," which was the uh, CD that she wrote after Fred died, her Sonic Smith husband, and
Yeah.
it's a masterpiece. And then I saw her a few years ago during the Horses tour, and oh my God, she was rocking at 68 or whatever she is.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
she's amazing. I'm curious, what's a tune from the Doors catalog that you're proud specifically of your drumming on that we might not think of as a great drumming tune?
Ooh, provocative.
Something
Well,
where we need to listen a little bit closer.
the music's over is it's real loose, and I have a conversation with Jim when he goes, "What have they done to the earth? What have they done to our fair sister? Stuck her with knives in the side of the dawn, tied her with fences, dragged her down." And I don't know, I had this impulse to go, kind of programmatic to that. That felt good. And I love building Ray's piano solo in Riders on the Storm with him. It's just the two of us are locked.
Well, as everyone knows, there was no, you were the rhythm section, I guess, unless you count Ray Manzarek's left hand, right?
That's correct. That's the rhythm section, his left hand and me.
Is there another group that you can think of that didn't have a bass player that kind of did what you guys were doing?
I think there was a group called the Seeds in the 60s that had organ, drums, and guitar or something. But, the Ray's bass lines, these simple, he said he got them from Boogie Woogie in Chicago. I mean, it just was our foundation. And
Yeah.
thank God we felt the tempos the same. That's really important. I think I say if you have a really great guitar player, but the rhythm section is lame, no, you're trying to get to the heartbeat, the back to the womb, homeland security. You have to have that pocket. So
Yeah. Riders on the Storm, I'm curious, they always say you should either say something or show something, but you don't want to show something and say something. So, for example, you say storm, you're singing about a storm, but you have rain sounds in the background. Was that a controversial thing where you guys we don't need the rain effects in the background, or we do? Because you also have the replication of the rain with the organ happening at the same time.
wow. Wait, what was that again? You should say something and not show.
Yeah, like when you're talking about, for example, like a graphic design or something, they say if you're gonna show an apple, show an apple. You never put an apple and then put the word apple underneath it,
Oh
right?
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Well, you know, it, it- I think maybe it was Bruce Botnick who suggested rain and thunder, and we felt okay. It seems programmatic. It doesn't seem manipulative. Then we got a little excited and started playing God, and it still worked though, where we had tapes playing music, playing rain and thunder. And then we had several machines queued up to specific thunder claps, which we would drop in like God right after a vocal or Ray plays some great lick or something, like an exclamation point. So
so that happened live. That was not
no,
added.
that was in making the record.
Oh wow.
So
You
I've
know,
given away some stuff there, but that's okay.
the secrets. So you finished this book. You know, like you mentioned, you've written what you call these self-centered memoirs, which are all great, by the way. But
Hey,
you know,
thanks.
what's aside from a screenplay or whatever, do you know kind of what's next? Are you always just kind of messing around writing stuff, and then maybe at some point it becomes something else, or do you have a system of like the next project is this?
I need to exhale.
Yeah,
I've been doing a lot of interviews, and
yeah,
but way in the back of my head, I have this story that I care about. You know, I
yeah.
think the lessons of Vietnam were, the lesson that was really learned is don't show the bodies coming back, or it'll mess up your war. So, um, yeah, I can get a little soapboxy, but well, that's why it's a love story, and the kid has to go to Canada, and his girlfriend stays here, and his dad has a heart attack. So, and his dad is mad as hell that he's a traitor. His son's a traitor, uh, and so he's got to sneak down to see him in case he dies. And I don't know.
Well, you know,
Pretty good story, huh?
yeah, well, well, you know, people often call people who left to Canada, you know, a conscientious objector, but that's actually a legal definition of someone like Muhammad Ali, for example. You have to apply for that status, you know.
Tell me about it. Ain't no Viet Cong called me the N word.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
what he said.
yeah.
Boy, he lost his belt over that one, but talk about integrity.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm curious, you know, as a seeker, as someone who's kind of looking for answers all the time, and I would assume from reading the book that you have resigned yourself to the fact that, which I also think is true, that you're always seeking and you never
yeah,
really get there. It's
yeah.
just the journey itself is the interesting part. Um, do you find, you know, how do you find kind of news seekers to follow? You know, are you listening to podcasts? Are you finding, you know, other people's voices to kind of see like, you know, because it's one thing to kind of, you know, most of the seekers that you write about in this book are contemporaries of yours or older, you know, old people, but you know, that were older than you. You know, are you able to find younger, newer voices out there kind of leading you in some interesting directions?
I'll let you know. I mean, I didn't know much about. It's funny. I didn't know much about Mark Maron.
Yeah.
Uh, and I went and put in this interview he did with Gary Shandling because they were talking about silence, and I wax on and on about sound. Without silence, sound, there's no contrast. You need it. And and then I did Mark's podcast, and I had to catch up. And wow,
Yeah, I listened to it. You guys had a great conversation.
whew.
Powerful.
No, but I mean, he tells it like it is,
Yeah.
right? So there's one new
Yeah.
seeker I can feed off of.
Yeah, no, it's you know, and Gary Shandling, gosh, he was a seeker. You know,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
interesting. There's a book about him out that's really interesting as well. But well, that's you know, there's so many avenues now between podcast and books and you know everything else to kind of find. Um, I guess in some ways that's dangerous too, right? Because you could only find people that are interested in what you're interested in. One of the best things from the books or from what you write about the seekers is, you know, you're going down roads that you might not even be interested in. You're kind of finding serendipitous paths of like, hey, maybe if I go this way or see what this person's doing, it's not just following the things you think you're already going to be interested in, you know?
Yeah, well, that's been a big worry of mine for several years now. I mean, there's all this cool stuff. We're all home now. We don't go to the movies. And then there's Hulu and Netflix and Ding Dong and Wooha. And most working class folks can't afford these channels, which really have important creative information. It's a problem,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. The kind of equity of that creative material. Um, well, before we wrap up, we've got a couple minutes left. I'm curious, you got that drum set behind you. Do you play it much, like when just for fun? Do you every day? Do you take time to bang around on those things? Like,
No, not every day. I got it right there though, in case I feel the urge. And I, I think I have this concept that writing is like writing a sentence is a musical question. If it's short, it's percussive. And if it's long, it's melodic, or it's too long and you better edit, you know?
Yeah.
So
So
I'm
like
looking for,
so like
yeah,
Hemingway was a good percussive
right,
writer.
right, exactly. And so I'm looking for music in between sentences. And, if I feel stuck, I'll read my paragraph out loud. Boy, that tells you a lot
Yeah.
as far as flow and phrasing and,
Do you enjoy, you mentioned it obviously for those watching, if you're having a good time tonight, even though you have the book, I do like sometimes to read the book and also listen to the book. You mentioned that you actually have some music components. Do you have a good time doing those the audio versions of these things?
fabulous. I got Bruce Botnick, the Doors engineer. I mean, it's not throughout the whole thing. I'd say about a third of the book has music, but sure was fun. I mean, it was pretty intense reading the thing. I'd done it before, but you sit down for 5 hours for 3 days in a row, blah, 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 and you want to make it real. It's intense.
Yeah. We'll end with this. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on kind of drummers right now, but someone asked the question, what were your feelings about the passing of Neil Peart, the legendary drummer from Rush? Did you know him much? And also, who are the great drummers around still? Are people still doing it the way they used to do it?
Whoa, God, I wish I knew. No, Neil was a master, that's for sure. I never met him. Oh, Ginger, he's pretty amazing, Ginger Baker. Actually, it's funny. We're recording "Hello, I Love You," and Robbie Krieger says to me, "Why don't you turn the beat around like Ginger Baker does in "Sunshine of Your Love"?" I went, "What?" And then it's da 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 ba ba. It's these offbeats. So I did it. Hello, I love you. Won't you tell? Hello. I copped a little. You steal from the best.
Yeah, and the song begins with just such a great drum moment too. That's kind of kicks the whole song off.
Which, his or mine?
Yours, yeah,
Oh,
yours.
great. Thanks.
Yeah, Hello, I Love You just kind of just that
Yeah.
has that,
Yeah.
you know,
Da-da-da-dong.
it's just like one of the great drum intros. It's kind of like, like a Rolling Stone, the snare that's
Yeah.
changed the whole world.
That floor tom that goes bow, it's barking back. And when I was with Willie, I said, his guitar trigger is this old beat up piece of shit, but and nylon strings, and it just got so much soul. And I said, I hate it when I break a drum head, because then the new one doesn't have all that character barking back at you.
Yeah.
The ultimate would be Levon Helm, who stayed with calf skin heads. We all went to plastic. So maybe the animals, you're hearing them as you hit the drum.
My last question is, when the Doors after LA Woman, of course, there was Other Voices and there was Full Circle. So that was, I think, just like 2 years after that. And I don't know if that was part of like a contract that you guys had as well, but I'm curious, there's some great tunes on those albums. And
Oh,
I'm
thanks.
wondering, did you have more input? Because they sound different, they're not, they have a different vibe and there's something else going on there. And there's more, I don't know, more rhythm, more percussion. I don't know, just something, but I was just wondering if you were involved differently with those two albums that came after in any
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Well, Jim was in Paris, and it was, the concept. Pam said, "Let's get out of L.A." And unfortunately, he, like the French do, drank a lot of wine. But he's over there, and we're kind of waiting for him, and so we start playing and writing, and then he never came back, and so that's why what you hear there is different.
Yeah.
And at least we didn't try and replace him. And who's going to fill those leather pants, huh?
Yeah. It's a
So
good
Ray and
question.
Robbie tried to sing, and that's some good songs. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's, worth checking out. The Mosquito is a fun tune. Okay, well, this has been such a pleasure, and I hope everyone out there enjoys reading The Seekers. It's a great book. Like I said, 2021, we're going to have a much better year. I feel it.
Yeah.
This is going to be a great book for you. Once we can travel again, take it with you when you go on your journeys next year. It's also a great gift. So I hope you guys are giving some of those to some people over the holidays. But John, this has been such a huge honor, and I can't thank you enough for spending a little time with us.
Hey, Jeff, your great knowledge of music and books, really fun.
Yeah, thank you
I mean,
so
from
much.
Joan Didion to Lou Reed, you know?
Hey, well, we had some great questions too to help me go down those roads. So thank you all for watching. Stay safe, take care, and we'll see you all in 2021. Take care, everybody.
Adios.
Bye bye.